is up with Justin Jefferson? That and more this week on the couch. So tell us, Ian Hartitz, what is up with Justin Jefferson?
What's up, Sig? I wish I
What's up?
knew, man. How does this guy look so freaking unguardable in the entire week one against a Packers defense that we hold, and I think some level of respect? I thought they were going to be the best defense that Rodgers has played with going this year. Maybe not quite there yet. Still a long season, but just seeing the quote unquote Cooper Cup rule, man, that we just heard all off season long, and it annoyed me, man, in terms of like it's Justin Jefferson. Who needs the Cooper Cup rule to do anything? But in week one, we did see the slot reps, him getting matched up on linebackers and safeties more so than cornerbacks. And I know some of that was Jair Alexander not shadowing, but that was the exciting part for Justin Jefferson because we know he's not going to get the 150 yards and 2 touchdowns every single week. Who does get that every single week? But I thought the floor was going to be higher than what we've seen over these past 2 games, 6. So look, Justin Jefferson, we're all still going to rank him as a top 5 receiver, right where he should be. No one's even going to dream of, bumping this down out of your starting lineup. Maybe you move him from like wide receiver 1 to flex, just try to start fire under the guy or something like that. But more than anything, man, I think it's back-to-back defenses doing a great job at just completely take them out of the way. I mean, just watching the film from week 3, like you saw the amount of plays where Jefferson just had 2 defenders running with him. That's why things were made so much easier for Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne at the end. So luckily, man, I would just say with Minnesota, the fact they have been more of a pass-heavy offense, and look, there's going to be more big days to come for Justin Jefferson, just like Jamar Chase, just like Cooper Kupp. How about that, man? Week 2, we had all the big running backs busting, everyone freaking out. Week 3 is the wide receivers. That's just fantasy football for you.
Yeah, I think more than ever. And maybe it's because, Ian, so many more people are paying close attention to fantasy football and parsing and analyzing and agonizing over every single thing that happens. But the waves feel choppier right now. I say waves, by the way, too. I want to say my thoughts go out to everyone down in South Florida on the West Coast preparing for Hurricane Ian. What did you do, man? No.
I've had so many people that I haven't talked to in years reach out and they're like, "You see this hurricane? It's named Ian." Like, yeah, how's your day going? Like, sorry, I guess. But
right, it's nothing to do. Although the National Weather Service, I think, does retire names after hurricanes. Like, there isn't going to be another Hurricane Katrina. Anyway, the waves. We're all nauseous. We're all seasick. I think there's some ways to unpack this stuff, and I think you gave us some clues, right? I mean, really, like you said, what we saw in week 1, and this is why it was hard to not overreact to it, was exactly what we had been sold in the offseason. It was exactly what we thought Justin Jefferson was capable of. And the scheme, the play design, the new offense did its part to amplify and turn Justin Jefferson into a week winner in week 1. Then in week 2, you have Kirk Cousins, Monday night. That's never good. And then you add this Miami, this Philadelphia team that is just on a mission right now. And we saw what they did to Carson Wentz. They basically like pulled him apart limb by limb last week. So we're going to see what they do against Jacksonville. Man, that's a great matchup. What a time for those 2 teams to be meeting. So really, and also let's mention Jeff Okudah, Detroit rising star at cornerback. So it's not really that surprising. Like 6 for 48 is a more of a typical floor game for a player in the Cooper Cup role. But last week seemed to be really a bit extreme, but I think it presents a buy low moment, but it also illuminates how, and I keep coming back to this because I've been watching too much baseball this year. I saw there was a big controversy over whether they were going to cut in with Aaron Judge. And I guess because baseball was my first love, I wanted to be the Pittsburgh Pirates play-by-play announcer. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I love baseball myself back in the day until kids started throwing curveballs and the average goes from 400 to 200 and all of a sudden things aren't quite as fun.
Yeah, right. I mean, the hardest sport to play is hockey. Like that's the sport that is like layers upon layers of skill and physicality and conditioning.
They play on skates. Like I just can't get past that. Crazy.
You can't get past that, right? But in Canada, like you're born, you come out of the womb, and instead of like the little beanie, they put skates on your feet. But the hardest thing to do in sports is to hit a breaking ball. Like that's the hardest single specific thing to do. Anyway, I've got baseball on the brain. It's getting to postseason and things like that. Controversy about it is a big deal if Aaron Judge hit 61 home runs. Anyway, I always think of the pitcher and the catcher when I think the pitcher and the batter when I think of coordinators when they dial up their play calls, right? The defense that's dialed up against the formation and personnel set. And I think much like in baseball where you can have the outcome anywhere from a strikeout to a home run, that happens sometimes because of the way we talked about what the scheme adds or the play call adds. And of course, the players have to execute too. And I think that's partially why we're seeing these wild fluctuations too. It's just the way different teams match up with each other, the strengths and weaknesses, or how they can handle specifically, like this is your trick, this is your kung fu. And there are just going to be certain coordinators that against a certain type of offense with certain types of strengths, they shine better with their personnel or their approach. And there are others, and I think you're just going to see more wild fluctuations because behind the scenes, it's the puppet masters of the play callers on both sides, and oftentimes that's who really gets the W or the L for the play, even though the stats get attributed to the units. And I especially I think when we get to some of these offenses, like for instance Philadelphia's, that can really I'm thinking of like professional wrestling, like the figure four submission hold. Like they can put offenses in a submission hold, and I think that's maybe what we should be chasing more, are these offenses like Philadelphia, like Detroit, that at least so far seem like nobody could slow them down. That was a huge rant for lots of different things, but what I want to hand off to you in this way, because in some ways, week to week, we've seen a lot of surprises. But when you just look back over the whole first 3 weeks of the season, Ian, what has surprised you? What has genuinely surprised you and forced you to adjust?
I think it's been how quickly the Dolphins and Eagles have just been the top two passing games in the NFL. I expected them to be better. You add AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill to any passing attack, and you're going to get a lot better. But literally, top two offenses in EPA per play, with the Eagles being one, the Dolphins being two. And it hasn't looked fluky at all, man. Just this mesh of Tua and Jalen Hurts putting the ball where it needs to be, and that ball always being put on a pretty much wide open receiver. I mean, the Eagles offensive line in particular has been doing great. Maybe not quite the same dominance over there in Miami, but I think what you were talking about before with the scheme and things like that, I think that's why people have been hesitant to kind of anoint Tua as the next big thing at quarterback, because you watch him in the game and Tyreek Hill sometimes does need to slow down a step or two to catch the deep ball and things, but honestly, we just need to get past it, because these are things that we just kind of care too much about. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, man. Style points don't matter in fantasy football. One of my favorite stats at PFF that we always have is big time throw rate. And I do think that helps quantify what we see with our eyes when we're watching these games, these elite tight window throws downfield. But 20 yards is 20 yards, man. And if you're able to get that on a dump down to a wide open Jalen Waddle, why do you need to force it downfield in the first place? So seeing Mike McDaniel just get all the praise all throughout the offseason. But we've seen this, plenty of times with the new hot shot coordinator, and he comes down to something different. Just what they've been able to do. Second, yards per pass attempt, second PFF pass grade, the EPA. They're third right now in just play action on the season, and they're first in pre-snap shift and motion. So you look at the offense and just small things, man. Jalen Waddle had a screen touchdown a couple weeks ago, and they just showed how Tyreek lined up at running back, flew him to one side of the field. And of course, the linebacker's got to take at least one step his way. And then, I'm throwing it back to Jalen Waddle on this side. So all the speed's over there. And again, it's not that surprising that they're having more success, but to literally be a top two offense out of the gates in Miami, it's been great to see. And it's just, I've had to come to grips with, even if Tua maybe isn't, doesn't have the same arm talent as Mahomes and Herbert, we can see that. But hey, if the yards and points are counting the same, man, that's all we care about. So it's been, kind of correcting my just overall pessimism among Tua being able to enable two top, 12 or top 24 wide receivers, because you look up and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are number one and number two in yards per route run to start the season. So such a fun offense in Miami. And you already mentioned it in Philly. I mean, pick a stat, any stat for Jalen Hurts. PFF passing grade number one, QB rating, he's fifth. He's number one in yards per attempt. And this is a guy that I don't think we were expecting him to be this field. We would have taken an average passer this year, man. And just the fact that we've been able to get not just an average one, statistically, the best passer in the NFL right now is residing in Philadelphia. And that's on top of the rushing volume that we don't even really have to mention because of how many good things he's doing through the air with AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. But right now, Jalen Hurts is on pace to have 210 rush attempts this season. Lamar Jackson is the only quarterback in NFL history to top 150. So we have Jalen Hurts being the most efficient quarterback in the NFL and also running more than any quarterback has ever run in the course of a season. The dude's on pace to break fantasy football.
Yes. Well, and I think that's the thing we have to take notice of. I even recommended Quez Watkins as a last waiver wire pick up one unit, especially when you think about if your team is cruising and you're really just looking for high potential outcome players to stash on your bench, because I think that you can see that it's the efficiency, right? I think that in both of these cases, and I like how maybe we should just get to a point, Ian, where we say we don't have to figure out the why. We don't have to exactly know the why. We just need to pay attention to the what. And the what in this case is highly efficient offenses. And I know that because it's so much easier to track and measure, volume is something, or even usage is something that people really want to pay a lot of close attention to in fantasy football to try to presage or show you that fantasy fertile soil. But efficiency is the miracle grow. Efficiency is what makes the fruit and the flowers and all that good stuff
Especially in the
happen.
passing game. Especially
Yes.
in the passing game.
Yeah, and how's efficiency created? It's mostly, I think, created by play design and calling and execution in one-on-one matchups. Execution, like doing your job, and you have to have a quarterback who understands the play and has the field vision and the processing to just make a valid decision. And this is why, and I'm not trying to slight Tua when I bring this up, Ian, but this is why I keep thinking of Nick Foles and the ridiculous year he had with Chip Kelly. And how, hey, the scheme can take a quarterback who just execute. Jimmy Garoppolo, what he does in Kyle Shanahan's offense, once was partially Mike McDaniel's offense, just execute. So we don't have to even argue, is it Tua creating the value or not? Because the value is there. Now with Philadelphia, again, I mentioned Quez Watkins, even Kenny Gainwell. I know Kenny Gainwell. I think the problem with Kenny Gainwell is they're not in close games. They're not in games where the game script would favor his usage. Kenny Gainwell, Quez Watkins, if Quez Watkins becomes a top 2 receiver in this offense because of an injury, Ian, he's the Rashad Bateman, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And I think people would be happy to have Rashad Bateman. So we don't think of injury upside wide receivers, but this Eagles offense is so good that we might need to. And Jalen Hurts absolutely looks like he's going to break leagues now, fantasy leagues, getting him Lamar Jackson, getting him where they went. On Tua and on Miami, I want to circle back around to this. I think that, and I get wild-eyed, but I really wonder, because I do think Mike McDaniel's smart enough to understand that why things went the way they went in week 2 was the amount of yards he made the defensive backs run. And I think also you can add on to that too, that just when teams play, you could really see it in Buffalo late in the amazing playoff game last year.
Oh yeah.
When Tyreek Hill is on the field, defenders play on their heels. It's a mental thing too. Mentally, they're on their heels. And I just think that gives you an advantage before the ball's even snapped if you understand how to use it. And I think Mike McDaniel does. This is why the Mike Gesicki thing, he's another one that I might want to stash on my bench, right?
Yeah.
If they can figure out a way, I want to send them Lance Zierlein's scouting report when he came out in the draft. It's not that difficult. If they just see this is actually what he does well on a football field, I trust Mike McDaniel except on that. But Buffalo held the ball for like 40 minutes, right? So there's no way for that to work, even though Buffalo had a bunch of young inexperienced defensive backs in. So we get to turn around and see this on Thursday, another great matchup, Miami and Cincinnati. So again, it's that high efficiency level. And I think that there's another story. I'll hand this one off to you too. What do we do with a DJ Moore? What do we do with a Darnell Mooney at this point? There's the very opposite end of the spectrum where the soil is so barren that nothing can grow.
Yeah, just cry, maybe.
Yeah, that's always good. Let it out. If you feel like you need to cry, cry.
One quick note on Tyreek Hill, because I think he said it, man. I think he changes the way defenses play more than any other wide receiver in the NFL. If we had to say best pure wide receiver, going into this year, I'd probably still give Devontae Adams that crown. But I love the idea. Basketball always seems to be a little bit ahead of football in terms of like advanced analytics and the way they're able to do things. Only 10 players on a court versus 22. Yeah. I get it. And you got obviously larger sample size, but the idea of like gravity, and they show someone like Steph Curry and how just the entire defense just warps to him wherever he is on the court, whether he's getting the ball or not. And, seeing Steve Kerr, I think, just talk to Steph one time where he's like, look, shots weren't falling, but he's like, just having you out there, man, helps everyone else because of how you're forced to mesh him. I don't even want to say lucky, but I got to go sit in the nosebleeds when for LeBron's last game in Cleveland when they got swept by the Warriors. And that was my big, impression. Like, yeah, Durant was incredible, Klay Thompson, incredible and stuff. But just watching like the sheer panic that everyone on the court felt the second that Steph would like get past half court. That's what we see with Tyreek Hill when he's out there doing pretty much anything. So yeah, very fun, Dolphins offense and those complimentary guys. I mean, it's too bad we're not going to get a number 3 wide receiver seemingly today, although they did give Cedric Wilson some decent money back in the offseason. He's been a little bit banged up, but hopefully, as we see the running back committee get a little more clear, one of Mostert or Edmonds can give us some good love, because that's the thing, man. We just talked about these Eagles and Dolphins offense, and it's crazy that we don't really have a running back from either that we can really feel great about, at least for the time being, though. But yes, these are the situations to hopefully buy low on. Not so sure we can say the same about, as you said, DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney. I will say I'm more willing to go to DJ Moore, I think, in the future, just because the one thing we haven't seen in Carolina is Baker really check the ball down the same way these other quarterbacks have with Christian McCaffrey. And McCaffrey, I know he hasn't, exactly been the overall RB1 that we all hyped him up to be. Neither is Jonathan Taylor, and I think that's kind of been saving the conversation.
Or Austin Eckler, or Dalvin Cook's already hurt. Derrick Henry, Najee Harris. It was not a great year so far to take running back in the first round.
You just needed to take the Jamar Chase and Justin Jeffersons of the world, who haven't been doing much instead, over these past 2 weeks. So I always just laugh when we start getting these week 3, week 4, victory laps. Oh, this was the year to do 0 RB. Let me just only talk about the 5 or 6 players that confirm my priority. But no, all the top running backs objectively haven't been doing great. But I do just wonder, man. We had the Robbie Anderson big week 1, and Baker has been really bad, I think, for about 10 of the 12 quarters he's been playing this year. DJ Moore, though, we still know he has a talent. The dude's been on every single probably week 3, week 4 buy low, trade strategy article for the last 3 years running. So this isn't anything new. And I do just wonder if we have a chance to get DJ Moore with people pricing him more as a wide receiver 3, dare I even say a wide receiver 4. Like, that's the sort of talented player that we just talked about, trying to buy the efficiency, which I know that passing game as a whole doesn't have right now, but we have seen DJ Moore do this, with numerous quarterbacks, numerous times. So DJ Moore, someone that unfortunately you had to draft closer to his ceiling. He was a top 15 wide receiver. Now you can buy him more so as, a top 35, top 30 wide receiver. I'm far more willing to do that for him versus someone like Darnell Mooney, where it's just like, QB rating, it gets a lot of shit, and I think it deserves to get a lot of shit when you look at the quarterback, only the quarterback, because we know how much more goes into a passing game than just that. When you look at QB rating, though, for an entire offense, I think it's an okay stat.
Yes,
it's like an offensive, it's like a passing rating. It's not necessarily QB rating. So you look at it for the whole offense. The Bears QB rating this year is 50. The next worst offense is 75. Like, they are so hellaciously bad, man, that I just Mooney, Cole Kmet, anyone at this point other than the running back, it's tough to feel good about Chicago. And I think a lot of that blame should go to Justin Fields, but also but we also looked at this every single offseason move they made going in this year. We joked about it. We said, how the hell can you enter week 1 with these wide receivers? And even the few upgrades they tried to make that we mocked. Byron Pringle's on IR. Velus Jones hasn't played yet this season. Like, they actually tried to do a few things. And even those guys haven't worked. So we now have Justin Fields, who I think objectively had the worst supporting cast in the entire league going into the season. And now he's playing with backups. Like, look what Tom Brady's done with his backup wide receivers. And they're sure as hell a lot better than, what Justin Fields is doing. So I'm happy now that some people will walk away saying, oh yeah, that Ian Hartitz guy compared Justin Fields to Tom Brady. But really, man, like this, I think objectively we all looked at the Bears this year and we knew we weren't going to be able to get a read on if Justin Fields is the guy for the future or not. And yeah, I don't think we're good. It certainly looks bad, man, but it's just unfortunate that, when your team, like, look at what everything that's been done for Jalen Hurts and Tua and these teams that drafted their quarterback. Let's find out if they're the guy for the future or not. And if not, then we'll move on. Like, I don't know how you can look at this supporting cast that the Bears have around Justin Fields and be any closer to knowing if he can actually be the guy or not.
Yeah, on DJ Moore in Carolina, I will say one potential critical point of failure there has been McAdoo. And this was something we watched where no one wants that job. Matt Rule's dead man walking. So that's the best they could do. And so far, it's looked like, well, I mean, Ben McAdoo's offense, even folks that suffered through the years that he's with the Giants said, yep, that's a Ben McAdoo offense. And, McCaffrey, I'm not even sure you could truly buy him low anyway. I think that you're kind of going down with the ship. And then on Chicago, and I think you bring up at some point, and look, on one hand, you could say either they don't trust Fields or Fields isn't giving them reasons to trust him. When you watch Fields, it does not seem like his radio is picking up a station on, you know what I'm saying? Like
Great way of putting it.
he's getting static. The game's not really speaking to him. There's not moments. Even Trevor Lawrence last year in the Urban Meyer debacle. That's another thing we could talk about. How much it's not just coaching, it's culture. It's not even coaching and culture. It's just a sense of morale, right? Just morale of the team. And how much that changes. But with Chicago, I don't think it's necessarily morale. I think that you can see the team is playing spirited football. And I mean, in some ways, for the running game and the defense, it's almost a perfect narrative for them to say, well, we're almost playing against our own passing game. We're playing against our own offense because a lot of locker rooms, a lot of defenses get motivated that way. Teams have won Super Bowls that way. But for fantasy, you do have to at some point say, like, it's just not going to happen with Fields. I just don't. I mean, I don't know how much more you could manage him, and it's just sad because that picture of Darnell Mooney catching balls from the jug machine an hour after the game. Like, I know one day, really the bottom line is here in your dynasty leagues, like, see if you can pilfer Darnell Mooney for cheap. I want to go back to what you said about the running backs of Philly, Miami, and I know Devin Singletary had a huge game as a check down receiver for Buffalo, so that kind of takes his buy low window, maybe closes it. But I do think something we can start to think about now is that football in September and October is different than football in November and December, especially December. And Buffalo, Philadelphia, Miami, these teams with these designs, they are going to have to establish the run. They are going to have to run the ball. And that's where looking longer buy low opportunities come. And I guess on the flip side, but similar, one of the other stories of so far this season is Lamar Jackson. Please pay him. Please.
Billions. Come on,
Steve Biscotti. Come on. Like, just give him a blank check, just so we can all, like, exhale, because I don't want his story to be like he gets some catastrophic injury before he gets his bag. Fortunately, the franchise tag. Anyway, he's just so inspiring as a quarterback at this point, as a passing quarterback. And he seems like he's doing a better job preserving himself. You would think, Ian, that the pendulum is going to swing back. And this is why we remain interested in Miami's running game. This is why we remain interested even in someone like Mike Gesicki, is the pendulum swings back and defenses will adjust or attempt to adjust. And then if a rational coach, and you certainly look at Nick Sirianni, Mike McDaniel, Ken Dorsey, even though he lost his mind. I mean, I think these guys are going to be rational coaches. Greg Roman wants to run the ball. So is there something there? Do you think there's going to be something there with the Baltimore running game before the end of the year?
The only problem with all those, with the exception of Miami, really, is we're looking at not two backfields. There's usually three in all these places, and it's been a consistent three. I mean, even last week, J.K. Dobbins was splitting with Justice Hill, and I'm not convinced that's going to go anywhere. Gus Edwards is going to be back in 2 weeks, so I do think they could run more, but it's still situations where I think the way that these quarterbacks play football, we're just not going to see the running backs be the sort of fantasy-friendly assets that we're hoping to come out of these high-scoring offenses. And yes, these quarterbacks keep playing football the way you play football. Your real life team and all your fantasy managers are very happy for the way you do. But this has been something that we've seen over time. It's why Josh Allen and the Bills have been consistently one of, if not the best offense over the past 3 years. And we just very sporadically get a good Devin Singletary game, usually only when they decide, later in the season, more times than not, to make him the full featured guy. Because when you have this dual threat quarterback, they're scrambling instead of checking the ball down. And once they get around the goal line, they're basically another piece of the pie that can potentially take it in for 6 on their own. So in Baltimore, in Buffalo, and in Philly, it's this bad combination of having the dual threat quarterback that's not giving them as many fantasy friendly opportunities, and coaching staffs that have just been willing to, not go to the next running back up and all of a sudden give them a workhorse role. I mean, let's not forget Miles Sanders missed a lot of time last year. Kenneth Gainwell almost got demoted when that happened because they just signed Jordan Howard and they wouldn't give him the early down work. So I know there's Kenny Gainwell truthers everywhere. And I do think his best case scenario would be like this Austin Eckler, Naeem Hines sort of role where, okay, we're fine with 10 or 12 carries if we can get, 5 to 7 targets. That's what we care more about for running backs anyway. So I'm not saying to completely give up on the guy, but again, it's just Baltimore, Philly, and Buffalo. Even if the starting running back gets hurt, I still think we're going to be looking at fairly muddled committees in all these places. Where it's interesting is Miami, because if either Raheem Mostert or Chase Edmonds go down, all of a sudden we're looking at someone that I think would have, that Jeff Wilson role to kind of go back to San Francisco, where all of a sudden they're on the field far more downs than not. So we'll see. I think at the end of the day, though, in those offenses, it's the quarterback and everyone else. That's why quarterbacks are, that's been the one we talked about, the running backs and wide receivers going up and down. It's these freaking, because in the past, we had some dual threat quarterbacks come in and help break fantasy football. The stat I kept bringing up in the offseason was like, I think 11 of 12 quarterbacks to have over 125 rush attempts in a season were a top 12 quarterback on a per game basis. So I wasn't just rewarding guys for having the rush attempts and making it through the season. Per game, these were still QB1s. Now we're seeing the same group of dual threat quarterbacks, because there's not a ton in the league that do that by any stretch of the imagination. The guys that are doing it, Lamar, Kyler, Jalen Hurts, and Josh Allen, they're also now flirting with the passing numbers that guys like Brady and Rodgers and Cousins are supposed to have the lead on. So, man, we understand. And again, it's not like I get that people out there realize that dual threat quarterbacks are better fantasy assets, but this is like, at this point, we're seeing these quarterbacks start to be like, prime Christian McCaffrey. They're dual threat players.
Unfair.
That are cheat codes in both facets of the game they're being used, and they're unfair. And maybe that's going to make us like, hey man, I know we balked at the idea of a lot of us balked at the idea of Josh Allen in the third round of these drafts and everything, but I know we weren't balking at Kyler and Jalen Hurts going in round 6. I will be curious in future years if quarterbacks going in the top 5 rounds are just going to become more common than ever, because the way they're playing football is more different than ever.
Yeah, and I think in the case of, and I tweeted out earlier this week, Ian, that Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts are going to bring early quarterback drafting back into style. And it's actually, and this is one of those structural things that can be exploited so easily in fantasy football. I think I talk myself in circles because sometimes I think there's so much analysis. It's such an oversaturated space that there aren't really information edges anymore, right? I don't even know if there's honestly an edge on where you get your information. I think the people that are doing the best actually understand and analyze us, Ian, and know what our strengths and weaknesses are in a way that if they told us that, I hope we'd all say like, yeah, well, thanks for paying such close attention to what I do. You're right. These are my blind spots. These are the things that I get right, and then pick and choose from each analyst what is generally their strong suit, even though the analysts themselves, we're just applying ourselves, as far as we're concerned, equally everywhere. So maybe you can get an edge doing that. But there are some things, and I'm thinking of my boss, my partner, Joe Bryant, and VBD, which he brought into the lexicon back in, I think, the 90s, which basically stands for the idea that a player's not worth the points that he scores, but he's worth the points over replacement. And, quarterback 12, quarterback versus quarterback 12, running back 24, and so on. And, there's variations and ways to look at it. But from a VBD standpoint, and look, right now, all three of them, Jackson, Allen, and Hurts, are all over 30 points a game in typical scoring. And there's plenty of quarterbacks. What's up, JJ Zacharyson? There's plenty of late round quarterbacks. There's plenty of quarterbacks that are 20-point guys. So that principle still stands from the late round quarterback streaming strategy. You can generally get 20 points off of the waiver wire, but getting 20 points off of the waiver wire quarterback when there are quarterbacks scoring in the 30s you can get 10 points off of the running back waiver wire. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, and also additionally, running backs now, there's Nick Chubb's over 20 points a game in PPR leagues, and no one else is even flirting with it, which is really rough. So I think you're seeing these advantages when you start to express in terms of VBD, which is the number of points over replacement. As of today, okay, we just stopped time today. Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen are first-round picks. They're first-round picks in fantasy leagues on a VBD level. They maybe should be the first 3 picks. Cooper Kupp, or even Mark Andrews is not giving you that kind of VBD, right? You can get 10 to 12 points at tight end. So I think that's something you can exploit in that sense. And I think a lot of people, when I tweeted that out, said, yeah, I was taking my quarterback in the 5th round this year. And maybe it's the 3rd round next year, but even in VBD terms, 3rd round is not nearly too steep a price to pay for a player that could potentially give you, a 10 to 15 point advantage over replacement. And the other side of the equation here, Ian, was that you looked over the quarterback landscape, and Trey Lance getting hurt is a problem, because he was the one who gave us that dual threat upside that was outside of the top 6 in drafts. And then you thought, well, Matthew Stafford, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Aaron. There's so many. Like Russell Wilson finally has a team that's going to let him throw, and one of the whatever. I'm going to keep taking the guys I like in the 5th and 6th round, like Darnell Mooney or Amon-Ra St. Brown, and kick quarterback down the block. And I think that there's a lot of people saying that strategy has really backfired, and they're seeing it every week that the quarterback is putting them at such a disadvantage that it's really difficult to make it up elsewhere, which is the reason you're supposed to be able to get away with waiting at quarterback. So I get a chance to do a nice tribute to Joe. And I think you're right to bring up with the Ravens the potential for it to be a 3-way committee. I am interested to see how J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards' knees respond. Here's one of my blind spots. Justice Hill. I've always been fascinated with the idea of his acceleration and straight line speed against defenses that are playing 11-on-11 football and guarding against the deep pass. We'll see.
Hey, I remember that, the hype for Justice Hill when he had that preseason, just hell of a show out game. I forget who he was playing, and it doesn't matter. I get it. It's just a preseason, but he mattered that day, man, looking great out there. But the last thing though, with our QB discussion, we have gotten a lot better at like the ADP. The preseason ADP has been much more matching like the final season finishes at quarterback more consistently, just as we've kind of gotten closer and closer to modern times. So 10 years ago, I think it probably did make sense to really just attack those late round QB waters. And there still have been some. I mean, Jalen Hurts last year had an ADP as a QB 12. In 2020, Josh Allen was a QB 11. Lamar Jackson in 2019, QB 11. Somehow Patrick Mahomes in 2018 was the QB 15. Trey Lance was supposed to be that guy this year. I couldn't believe like getting up to week 1, man, where he was still regularly going outside the top 10 quarterbacks when, me and I think a lot of other people, I know in Underdog Fantasy, he was going as QB 7, for a long time. So I really did think Lance was, to your point, the one kind of exception where if I didn't get the Hurts or Kyler, in round 6, I was usually circling back around trying to get Lance later. So unfortunate that one didn't work out. But yeah, in general, our ability to predict these quarterbacks has gotten better, and our ability to predict the running backs, if anything, it's probably got worse, man. I mean, over time, it's just like we don't have the same. We talked about volume, like versus efficiency for the passing game. For the run game, though, I think we can all kind of agree. Like, there's a reason why this week now Khalil Herbert, Alexander Madison, and Jamal Williams are going to be in so many starting lineups. It's because of that sweet, sweet volume, not because you necessarily think that those are 3 of the top 12 running backs in the league. But, we spend all offseason, March and April. It's like, what's his vision? What's his, ability to work inside this zone scheme? And then week 4, it's, this guy's going to get 20 touches. Like, let's freaking put him in the RB1 spot and go, have another drink. But looking at it, just 300 plus touch running backs by season. In 2000, there were 19. Last 2 years, there have been 4. So it's just, again, 2-back committees. Nowadays, we got to live with them. But more than anything, man, maybe just the manner in which the running backs are flying off the board. And we talked about the RB dead zone and everything. Maybe the RB dead zone should be, about when the first running backs are going off the board to begin with, and we start taking just one wide receiver after another early. So then look, there were spots and just, the value way of looking things is so great. And that's really what had me on guys like Kareem Hunt and Cordero Patterson, rounds 8 and 9.
Yes.
And even Chase Edmonds too, who hasn't worked out the same way, but it was trying to find those explosive pass catching running backs whose volume maybe doesn't look all that different than guys going literally 5 or so rounds before him. So lots of interesting strategy talks moving forward. Every offseason is a little bit different. We always have a chance for exceptions to make us all look like idiots or smart people in the end. But yeah, man, the overall though, just I don't think these high octane quarterbacks are going anywhere. I'm not the biggest college football guy in the world, but man, even if you aren't, I still see some of these highlights, the kids coming up these days. Football at every single level is just so much more advanced than it used to be. So yeah, we got to start adjusting to what fantasy is going to be like in the future. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
It is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I think that there's a lot of good stuff to sift through here. I think you're right that we may see structurally, if this continues, that next year a typical draft is like a 0 running back do the opposite upside down draft, because I see. So the way the story goes, you talked about 2000 before. Ian, I'm old enough to remember when we warned the people about running back by committee. We warned them around 2005, 2006 that it's coming. Running back by committee is coming. Bill Belichick, among others, kind of leading the way. And because it used to be stud running back, and that's why we have PPR. If you don't like PPR, just know that we have PPR because every fantasy draft, like 20 out of the first 24 picks were running backs. And it created something because it was just the position was too important because it was so many players where the touches were concentrated and they were so far ahead of the pack for fantasy value. And quarterbacks were drafted earlier back then too, because if you can imagine how if you take PPR out of the landscape, how much that inflates the value of quarterbacks. So even smaller differences between quarterbacks become more important. But because of the scarcity of the backs that get 300 touches, it pushes those backs up to the top, right? Because they're so much more difficult to get, but there's still so much volatility. One of the things that struck me this morning as I was just doing my work, producing content, that you can say Saquon Barkley means the surroundings don't matter for a running back, right? Then you can look at Najee Harris or Christian McCaffrey, whoever, and say, but the surroundings matter a lot for a running back,
But
right?
then they didn't the last few years with
exactly,
the same
right?
guys,
so it's there's not even any kind of but the point is volatility. And if we and I think that zero running back, what was the term Sean Siegel used, like anti-fragility or something like that, fragility, volatility. And I just think that, and then you're right also to point out, and there's a lot of subtext that we won't get into here, but I just think there's a lot more very athletic quarterbacks or players that are being allowed to develop as a quarterback, where their athleticism and their running ability is also part of what they offer, and then offenses are embracing that.
They just didn't even get a chance to do that for so long. Who was was it Warren Moon who said like he purposely ran the slower 40-yard dash so they wouldn't move him to wide receiver? I mean, this was a big problem for African-American quarterbacks for such a long time. And, I do think a lot of times, like in college, we see so many players, white and black, but they play quarterback in high school because they're the best player on the football team. And why not have your best player on the football team just touch the ball as many times as possible? But I do think more so just with the way, spread option schemes have opened things up in college football, we've just seen a more willingness to embrace the toolsy quarterback, man, the Josh Allens of the world, someone where like, hey, okay, he doesn't, he's not checking all Bill Parcells, 7 boxes or whatever. He didn't have the wins. He didn't have the 60% plus completion rate, but the guy can throw the football over the mountains and he can run around so much where again, it's, I was talking earlier on my waiver pod with Nathan Yonke, like, watching Jameis Winston play football, and Jameis isn't as mobile as other guys, but he's got such a freaking DGAF mindset that he forces defenses, for better and for worse, to cover every square inch of the field. And that's why I like Josh Allen, man, even before he became the world beater that he was in 2020. And, I can't go back to 2000s like you, Sig, but I can go back, a little bit here. And in 2018, 2019, the Josh Allen conversation was far different than it is these days. A lot of people didn't think he was going to turn around. The guy was out there, playoff game, fourth quarter, trying to throw, pitch the ball over his head to Dawson Knox, like just some crazy stuff happening. But you'd see the way defenses had to just entertain the fact that anything could happen there under center. So the more we see, again, just these quarterbacks with the ability to run, they're basically playing a different position.
Yeah. And, then again, you have like Justin Fields who can run, but they don't, you got to have something else. You got to have some sort of counterpunch, something. So there's never going to be, but more of these guys are going to get chances. And the bottom line is, the cool thing is fantasy football changes with the game. It actually makes you very responsive, even if you don't realize when you're changing your draft strategy that you're responding how the game is changing. You are. And that's part of what makes this fun, right? I mean, if we could just figure this out, then it would be boring. It'd be really boring. You mentioned Jameis Winston. So I want to step through, basically it's kind of like a multiple choice question, because we've been talking about offenses creating efficiency, right? Buffalo has to be in this conversation too. Miami, Philadelphia, Detroit absolutely is in this conversation. Jacksonville, we may come to find should have been in this conversation all along. But there are some offenses with pretty good quarterbacks, except for Jameis Winston, that he is kind of a good quarterback, like you said, in terms of what he does. And I think I even wrote in my classic piece, this is one of the few times I've mentioned this on the show, I wrote a piece the year that Josh Allen was in the draft titled "Why Josh Allen is Worth a Top 5 Pick." And one of the things I pointed out was he makes the defense defend the whole field. And because he can escape pressure, he makes them play the whole field for a long time. And generally good things happen when you can do that. So these are offenses that have been greatly underperforming expectations. and should become much more efficient offenses, may have a change that makes players almost universally in the offenses buy lows, right? So I want to give you the 4, and you can basically take this whatever direction you want. What do you think won't change? One do you think will change? Ones that you have like a riddle that you're trying to solve before you know how you want to act. We've got the New Orleans offense with Jameis Winston and no Sean Payton. We've got the Green Bay offense that has the lowest ADOT in the league. We've got the Kansas City offense that has Eric Bieniemy and Patrick Mahomes jawing at each other, frustration. And then you have Tom Brady, who looks kind of like Andrew Luck early in his career, just dropped in behind enemy territory, trying to shoot his way out, doing the best he can.
I will say right now, out of that group, I mean, the Chiefs is one of those things where our expectations are so out of whack that even when they're number 4 offense in the league, like they are right now in EPA per play, we're like, oh, something's wrong. They're not number 1 by a freaking landslide. So I do think they'll be okay. And it's, understandable to expect them to need a little bit of time to break things in. Similar sentiment with Rodgers. And then with Tom Brady, again, it's the same thing with, Matt made that Justin Fields comment earlier, but when you take away Mike Evans, when you take away Chris Godwin, when you take away Julio Jones, and like even Russell Gage, he's questionable every week with a hamstring injury. We're seeing Tom Brady look like he looked in 2019 with the Patriots when he had nowhere to go with the football. I think Brady's going to be just fine. If you want to buy into him right now, man, I couldn't be less worried about the overall upside of this attack once those weapons are back, because Brady's arm, man, looks absolutely fine out there. I mean, I was joking after week 2, like if Scotty Miller just had like a regular human being's catch radius, like he probably would have had like 150 yards in that game. Brady was putting it exactly where it needed to go. Just hasn't been, again, much help really afforded to the man. And that's life of quarterback. As much as we want to say he's the GOAT and, he needs to actually be putting up monster numbers week in and week out, it is a team sport after all. With Jameis, I love it, man. So my favorite guy to read every week. He writes for 11 Warriors, the biggest Ohio State Buckeye website in the country. His name is Ramsey Nasrallah, and he just has a situational every week that I love him. He described Wisconsin as, let me get it right. He always said Wisconsin is always good enough to almost be good enough. And I think that's the way I look at Jameis Winston. He's always good enough to almost be good enough. And that's what makes the whole experience, that great, because he really does have these extreme highs mixed with the extreme lows. And I think a lot of times we focus on the latter, or we just focus on, his goofy workout videos. But there's a reason this guy, won a national championship once upon a time and was the number 1 overall pick, and has had so many different coaching staffs put the trust in him. I mean, you talk to some wide receivers over the years, and the amount of guys that just really have marveled over the way Jameis throws the ball is something else. He just doesn't have that. You said Justin Fields, just seeing static back there. Like Jameis Winston, I'd love to see what he sees, because he
everything. He wants it all.
He always thinks it's going to be there. And when you see cornerbacks play, man, I was fascinated watching Chris Olave get to his 150 yards last week, because it wasn't, he made one sick downfield catch I think a lot of people saw early, nice contested play. The rest of it, though, it just didn't even seem that hard, because Olave, ran the freaking 4.2 40 before they adjusted it. But obviously a very fast guy. We always talk about how smooth he is, route runner. He was a top 12 pick for a reason. But defenses just have to respect that deep ball, because Jameis throws it every other pass seemingly. So the amount of easy comebacks is there for Olave, and accordingly the rest of the offense. It's a big positive to what Jameis brings to the table, having that downfield mindset. But we've just never seen a downfield mindset this high, man. Average target depth at 12 yards right now, it's easily the highest since 2015. If I could get my, PFF back-end tools to fully operate back 2006, I have a feeling it'd be the highest since then as well. He's 4th in big-time throw rate, a little more of a descriptive stat than something to necessarily judge a full quarterback on. But it just tells you, again, what we're seeing, that this dude is not afraid to throw downfield and certainly has a handful of great throws every game. But then he's also a bottom 5 quarterback in turnover-worthy play rate. So I've always been a fan of the Jameis experience. And the big thing, important thing for fantasy, though, is he is getting the chance to go full Jameis, this year. Maybe you can say never go full Jameis. Well, he is this year, and he's getting to do it with the 6th highest pass play rate in the league. So looking forward, man. They got the London game this week. We're back to having the 9:30 kickoffs. Got to love that. But they got the Vikings this week. Then they got the Seahawks, who, I think he could boom in terms of efficiency. Yeah. Not expecting a shootout. But after that, man, so 5 of the next 6 games come against the Vikings, the Bengals, the Cardinals, the Raiders, and the Ravens. I think each of those could feasibly have a game total starting with a 5. And those are the types of shootouts that when bye weeks happen, we're going to want Jameis on the squad. So right now, I'll give Trevor Lawrence the nod in terms of just most available quarterbacks on the waiver wire, just because this Jaguars offense looks amazing, man. They have. And I mentioned the Chiefs being number 4 in EPA per play. Right behind them are the Jaguars at number 5. I can't believe Travis Etienne has nothing to do with it. We'll worry about that later. But yeah, man, for me, Jameis, he's the boomer bust, number 2 streaming quarterback that, he was put on this earth to be.
Yeah. There's, I sift through this stuff, Ian, and it's kind of like the old optical illusion where like it's an old lady and it's a young lady, old late woman's face or a young lady, because I think that because we're only 3 weeks and we only have 3 data points, and we're still trying to tease apart the meaning of those data points is tough, right? Because with Kansas City, how much of their 4th overall EPA stat is because they faced a Cardinals team in week 1 that just looked like they didn't
blow them out.
I mean, they look like they didn't, and likewise, we're trying to figure out, like, I think Green Bay's defense is pretty good, and the first week you saw that they had a problem because they were stuck in zone, because Kevin O'Connell was the first time that they had to play against Kevin O'Connell Vikings, and they were just stuck in zone, like we talked about earlier, put Justin Jefferson in so many good spots. But now we see this Green Bay defense is pretty good. So with Kansas City, I wonder, because they look and then like the Chargers put the clamps on them on Thursday. I think, the Chargers defense is good. And granted, they lost Joey Bosa, but still the Jags. Now, what does that mean about the Jags? You can see how all of these observations are like dominoes to another observation. And we'll just see about Kansas City. I wonder, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is really the only fantasy success story at this point, and he's doing it in spite of those usage numbers that a lot of people like to see as strongly correlated with success. New Orleans, this is I'm taken from Matt Waldman, the great Matt Waldman, where he says like Jameis will like light the place on fire and then put it out. What I wonder about with Jameis, and I think you're right, I think everything you point to says like just let Jameis do. I mean, for fantasy, just let Jameis do Jameis, right? Because that's what's going to create the best outcome for us, as long as you don't have like -4 per interception or something like that, with Jameis, and then with his targets, and hopefully Alvin Kamara. We'll see. Kamara, I feel like watching Kamara and Henry, it's kind of like what we've seen with Zeke over the last couple of years, Ian. They're not bad. They're still starting quality players, but I think they're past their peaks. I think we've seen their peak football. I'm not sure how that's going to translate for fantasy. With Green Bay, really quick, and I know you just touched on them quickly because it's like Aaron Rodgers telling us relax, it's going to be fine. I wonder if Romeo Doubs, I have a little bit of remorse about not putting him higher in my waiver wire column, because I feel like there's momentum here. I think there's been a lot of leading indicators, what Rodgers has said about Doubs. And I wonder if we may look back and Doubs, I think there was even an item this morning that he may become the number 1 receiver in this offense. And we know what Aaron Rodgers can do in terms of efficiency. And they've had some tough matchups. They had a Tampa Bay matchup this week. That was just a street fight of a game. But the last thing I'll highlight, going back to Tampa, and again, my thoughts for the people on the West Coast there, having been through it now, hurricane evacuation and your life disrupted and everything. Tom Brady's playing better than you think he is. He's actually playing pretty well. I mean, he's doing everything he possibly can with what he has to work with.
This isn't like late career Drew Brees can't throw the deep ball anymore.
Right.
Couldn't be further from that.
Right. But I like one of the things you really highlighted, and I think this applies to Josh Allen too, is about Jameis Winston. He's a positive thinker at quarterback. You've got it in the NFL. You have to be a positive thinker. You have to see what's possible instead of having your brain have ghosts and boogeymen that are jumping out and saying, "Oh, if you try that, something bad might happen." And there are coaches, and I wonder if this was happening to Trey Lance. I wonder if it happened to Justin Fields already. I wonder if it happened to Mitchell Trubisky, where the coaching just drills Daniel Jones so much, like, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake, that they never find that place where they're playing right at the edge of their ability, which is where you have to play if you're a quarterback in the NFL. You have to be comfortable at the very edge of your ability.
It does seem like, you mentioned Daniel Jones. I think Aikman even brought that up on the broadcast last night. I couldn't watch the Manning stream. I was checking out the game with my mom, and she's not a fan of the Manning stream when her Cowboys are playing. When her Cowboys are playing,
she's a Cowboys fan.
Yeah, so I was like, all right, that's fair enough, Mom. I'll miss Peyton and Eli. This week,
Mom's the boss.
Of course. But the thing Aikman was bringing up was just that, Daniel Jones, just, he was really seeing it. Like, he needs to actively see it and then throw. In the NFL, that's too late most of the time. You got to be anticipating that. So the thing with Fields, and not to just bark too long about the guy, we saw him have 4 top 12 finishes last year in an offense that wasn't much better,
Right.
man. Like they were
Mooney
looking
had
better
1,000 yards.
That's what I'm saying. But like it was the same pieces. They're like they were certainly performing way better, but like the pieces on paper weren't necessarily this big upgrade over what he's working with this year. So that's just mine. Because if you look at what the Bear, and I know they're in different kind of stages, I guess, and the Bears had the reset, but the Jaguars had the reset too. And the Jets, at least are in their second year playing with Zach Wilson. Like you just look at the moves that the Jaguars and Jets made to produce their offenses, and surround their rookie quarterback with success versus the Bears. Justin Fields got Byron Pringle and Velus Jones. Zach Wilson got Garrett Wilson. The Jets were apparently down to the wire trying to get Tyreek Hill added to the equation. Yeah. They took Breece Hall in round 2. Like their offensive line is when it's not hurt is actually, on paper in a pretty good spot. The Jaguars, yeah, we laughed, all freaking offseason about all the money they threw at the skill position players. At least they threw a lot of money at the skill position players.
And they had a plan, and the plan's working.
And it's working. So that's again, the biggest, if you talk to like real football minds, and the big, I don't want to say cheat code, but the big edge, I think, in the team building perspective that teams still have is getting good to great play out of a quarterback still on their rookie contract, because that allows you to just flood the rest of your team with high-end resources. Look how quick the Bengals were able to build their defense, just with the free agency pieces. We've seen the Bills, really reset their offensive line quickly while working with Josh Allen. Teams trading for these number 1 receivers just to make the most out of these first 5 years. So, hey, again, I'm a Columbus, Ohio lifer. I always have a soft spot for Justin Fields and everything. Sure. But even putting that aside, man, you can't tell me. You look at the Bears and the Texans moves, and I know you can't tank in the NFL the same way as it's too violent of a sport. And I have no doubt in my mind that every single player on the Bears and Texans are playing their hearts out. Yeah, playing their hearts out every single play. You can't look me in the eye and tell me that these front offices have anything other they want to do over this year and really last year than to lose football games. Like that's been their goal. Unfortunately, Justin Fields and Davis Mills are the one doing it, and they're the ones obviously taking the bulk of the just fans getting after him. Like Justin Fields said it last week, and a lot of Bears fans took it the wrong way, where he was just like, we're the one out there playing, like we're more upset. I think he does care. It's unfortunate the front office doesn't care about this year.
Yeah, almost like he's being set up to fail.
Yes.
It really seems that way. And the thing is, and again, we can try to determine the why, but the what here is Justin Fields is going to fail with the Bears. And there's very few Ryan Tannehill stories out there. There's very few stories where a rookie quarterback, first round pick fails and then rehabilitates his career. And that's just sad. I think, some of it just, again, shows these quarterbacks have to play at the very edge of their ability. It's funny, like we already said earlier, like hitting a curveball is the toughest thing. Playing hockey is the toughest sport to play. But the most dangerous thing might just be being an NFL quarterback.
And that's why the idea that these scrambling quarterbacks are just going to get hurt. Shout out to Dr. Evan Porras with Fantasy Points. Like he's shown this over time. Like there really is no correlation to that at all. And just thinking about it like rationally, who do you like? Okay, we've seen the RG3s that like don't know how to slide. Like there might be a rare thing there where that's a bit of a problem. But I'll take the guy that might very well be the best athlete or the fastest player on the field to avoid those hits versus your Jimmy Garoppolo, Joe Flacco, who is literally a sitting duck in that pocket and allows the edge rushers to just pin their ears back and go after it. So, we always, every time Lamar misses a, open receiver, oh my gosh, look, he's a running back playing quarterback. We never say one bad thing about the pocket statue quarterback who has no chance of moving. If there's even a little bit of pressure, the play is completely dead. He gets sacked and it's like, oh, come on, O-line, do your job. Right. So It is wild just how much, and we see it with all the game graphics. Lamar Jackson's up there and he's being compared against Tom Brady with every single passing statistic. And we just don't even acknowledge the rushing stuff because historically in our minds, quarterbacks aren't supposed to be running. So right. we almost view it as like a negative, man. Like think about how, like the fact that Lamar is still slandered and like called a running back, and it's been tougher for anyone to talk bad about.
Third in the league in rushing yards. Third in the league in rushing yards. And it's just like, isn't that good, man? Isn't the quarterback's job? Isn't the quarterback job just to put up points on the scoreboard? Move the ball, yeah.
Ravens have the 4th most points since they drafted Lamar Jackson. Please. Billions of dollars, Baltimore. Reset the market. Why not?
Yeah. I love that you highlighted that. And it never made sense to me because people say, well, if running quarterback, more shots the defense gets to take. Yeah, but it's in the pocket where you're at the most risk because you can't dictate the terms of engagement. As a runner,
guys are rolling around your legs. And...
yeah, I mean, or you're getting bent, or I mean, there's all kinds of different things. You're sitting duck back there, and anyway, let's again another theme coming up here, and just to put a real quick exclamation point on something you said about the quarterbacks and that rookie contract window. It's the only thing that's just sad to watch the Chargers crumbling. You have a Chargers jersey behind you and a Cowboys, and
yes,
our author is going to be short.
We got Charles Woodson back there too.
Oh, nice. But so off the rails real quick, since you mentioned it, because you said you're Columbus, Ohio, but also said your mom is a Cowboys fan.
Yeah.
How's that? How's your mom a Cowboys fan?
She spent about 10 years of her life in Dallas, to be fair, back in her 20s. So she's actually lived in Dallas. And before that, my late great grandpa was a diehard Cowboys fan. So yeah. I've come up. I am also the Cowboys fan. But look, man, I was born in 93. I consider 2000, 2001 like my kind of first years, like really watching football. So I have seen less playoff success than Bengals and Browns fans alike. So, let me be a miserable Cowboys fan. I just don't want to get the, because my whole life, so how are you a Cowboys fan in Ohio? And it's like, I get it, but I am, and it's not just being a Super Bowl front runner out here. So other than that, give me my Buckeyes, Guardians now, as we're calling them.
Yes, and, youngest team in the league.
There we go. And I love my Blue Jackets over there in Columbus too. Going to a hockey game, Sig, man.
Yes.
Best sporting events to go to in real life are hockey games and, in my opinion, MMA fights. I haven't been to boxing matches and stuff like that, but combat sports, I think, in hockey, which hockey is pretty much the closest thing we have to a combat sport that's not exactly considered that. Oh my gosh, just the atmosphere when you get into those arenas. It's really tough to replicate it anywhere else.
It is probably some of the most cinematic. I can go right back in my mind to the moments of seeing some Penguins playoff games back in the Lemieux era. Spine tingling. But the Blue Jackets, you mentioned it. Let's geek out on hockey for a second, because it's getting hockey season's about to start. Didn't they get Johnny Hockey? It's like it's Blue Jackets time, right? I mean, there's a lot of excitement around the team.
Bro, yeah, I remember when we actually swept the Lightning a couple of years back. When they were basically like set up to be. I think they had the greatest regular season ever, and the Blue Jackets went right out there and took them down. Obviously, Tampa Bay's come back and gotten their revenge plenty of times there since. But no, this city, man, it's wild. It really is just Buckeye country, but they really help out the Blue Jackets as well. I got a fun little life hack there, those SIGs. So I still have my student ID. It says from college. It says like issued 2012 or 2013. Or whatever on it, but they give us like $25 lower bowl tickets to go and to sit in the Blue Jackets game. I'm sitting there with a straggly ass beard saying I'm still in college. They're like, oh yeah, man, go right on through. So I love our little Columbus downtown area, man. Ohio's always getting the butt of these jokes and stuff, but you know what, Sig, we're a nice, affordable place to live with an international airport and plenty of sporting events to go to. So nothing wrong with having a good home life and then being able to go travel out to the fun places,
No. And Columbus, kind of like Austin, hasn't degraded nearly as much as Austin has. Austin's like part of Silicon Valley at this point. But it was once, I remember going to Columbus in the 90s, and it was still kind of a sleepy college town. I mean, it wasn't really it was a place, I think, where people had a much more loose sense. People were more laid back about people. It's one of the reasons I like living in New Orleans, is that people let each other be and celebrate each other. So yeah, it's hockey season's about. We're getting to the other confluence. I know Jupiter was like the closest to Earth it's been in years. We're getting to a confluence on the sports calendar, and I hope that people can get joy out of more than just football, because you're gonna have NBA, MLB, hockey, and football, and college football, even beginning as college basketball, and it's good. And like you said, you're a Cowboys fan. I think I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but it's about family, it's about your people, it's about your past, it's about the things that make you, and that's part of how we are always celebrating ourselves.
Well, especially, Sig, I'm sure you feel the same way to an extent, like having to do this, full time. Like it's been way tougher, and I think just because of my job and not being able to, hey, Cowboys lose a bone-crushing defeat, I still have a lot of work to do that day, and then I need to do other stuff. And, obviously, I remain as objective as possible. I'm not going to put Zeke higher in my fantasy ranks because I'm a Cowboys fan or anything like that. So certainly, now relative to 10 years ago, I certainly would say my, just personal well-being has been a little bit less
Sure.
correlated with how the Cowboys are performing. So being able to just be an ignorant Ohio State fan on 12 fall Saturdays during the year, being able to just yell a bunch about a Blue Jackets team where I couldn't tell you every player on the team, not even close to it, but I'm just a fan, man. So that's one of those
Yeah.
things where it's a lot of the NFL fans we interact with on Twitter, where how it is sometimes a fantasy football tweet gets taken into the NFL fans, but not really fantasy Twitter side of things. And people start taking it personally. And it's like, yo, I'm not the enemy here, but I love seeing that fire, man, because that really is what it's all about. Before I love fantasy football, man, I love real football. None of that's there without the fans, man. So it is just, being in those environments where people are just so damn, I don't know what. And, I asked, like, why do we do this to ourselves, Sig? Why not, man? Like, what else is that good in life? Do I need to go hear the same political argument we've had for 300 years and we're going to have for 300 more? Or should I watch the news where the first 27 minutes are about death, disease, and politics, and then the last 3 minutes they'll show you the local wiener dog race or something like that? So I know sports, we get scoffed at a lot, but I'll take my sports over the reality TV news freaking way of things. Or if you just want to go touch some grass, that's maybe the biggest that's maybe the biggest one of them all. So let's touch some grass with some sports TV screens outside. I think that's the
yeah. And I think, and I'll cap this and just say that I think part of the reason that, like you said, sports, it has this place for us to release our emotions, oftentimes bottled up about who knows what we may not even know, and it's people being great, it's people overcoming, it's tragedy, it's loss, it's time slipping and windows closing and new beginnings.
It's a less like impactful to us personally way of like going through a lot of emotions. I think we have to go through them somehow.
Yes.
It's a lot easier when we go through them like watching sports than with any other number of real life events that could happen.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's therapy. It's therapy hanging out with Ian's therapy, hanging out with all of y'all. It's a great joy to get to serve you, and good luck. And it's on. And PFF, and you can follow him at Hartitz, IHARTITZ. And always look forward to our visits with you, everybody, because you're so classy.